Hi, I'm Angela Wolf. I'm a fashion designer, and today we're going to talk about the 20s, which normally you would think of the flapper dress. But actually, in the early 20s, just coming out of the teens, the skirts became a little bit thinner than in the late teens, and they had a little flare at the bottom. So I want to make this modern, and I'm going to show you how to take any plain pencil skirt and turn it into a gored skirt like this. The bottom has fullness, and then we're going to add piping to the skirt. So let's get started. Here is just my basic skirt pattern, just a basic pencil skirt. And I want to show you what the pattern ends up looking like. I took this pattern, made it a little bit longer, and added this fullness at the bottom. That gives you the nice full part at the bottom, so it's fitted all the way through. And on this skirt, it would be fitted all the way to just above the knee and then go out. You can imagine that would be very cute with a pair of boots. So let me show you how to change this pattern. First, cut out whatever size you normally have. I would probably trace your original pattern so you can keep it. And take your pattern, and along the hemline, which is right here, line up the hem and fold. Now you're going to do both on the front and back, but I'm just going to use one pattern piece to show you. So we have this nice fold. That's going to be a cut line. That's going to be one of your piping lines. Now, one thing you could do, you could also fold this right along that dart, and then you don't have to move the dart. So that's another option, okay? So I'm just going to draw this with a Sharpie so you can see a little bit better this fold. Okay, now on this skirt, I'm not going to make it longer. I'm just going to show you how to make that fullness. So I'm going to cut this in half. Make sure you label your pattern pieces, okay? Because you'll want to know that this is the center front and this is the side front. Because once you get them all cut up, especially if you add more lines than just the ones I'm going to show you, you're going to be very confused. And the other thing is I just want to make sure that I know this is the center. And we're going to cut along here. So I'm going to show markings that I'm going to add a seam allowance. So then I can also have a piping down the center. So here we have this. Now I'm just going to start working on the center piece. Again, you would do the same thing to all the pieces, what I'm going to do from this point forward. So let's just say that we want the gore to start about right here, to start to get full here. You would measure on your body. So for example, I would take a measuring tape from my waist and measure all the way down to where I wanted the gore to start. Okay, so, and then you would take that exact measurement and transfer that to the pattern from the waist down to where you want that fullness to begin. So I'm just going to make a spot here and draw a line. And you're going to draw that same line from after you mark your first pattern piece, measure from the hem to here, and mark that on every pattern piece. Then you're going to make a slash. Now if you're going to make the skirt longer, this is where you would lengthen it. Open it up as much as you need to and put paper in there to fill it out. But I'm just going to, let's see. Notice I'm snipping right to the edges here. Next, all I'm going to do is I'm going to draw 3 lines. They can be any width. You kind of want them to be equal. So let's just start with 1.5 inches from the side, 1.5 inches from this side. Again, you can make up your own measurements. This isn't technical. You just do whatever you want to. And then we're just going to mark something right in the middle. I'm using these lines. The lines I'm drawing are equal and parallel to the grain line. All right. I'm using different colors so you can follow along here. And all I'm going to do is slash. You've probably heard the slash and spread method of pattern drafting. That's what we're doing here. This is one of the easiest things to do. Okay, and notice I'm cutting all the way up, but not through. Okay? Take this, and look what happens when I spread this out. That's all you have to do. And you can make this as wide as you want, or as narrow. So let's again compare this with one of these pattern pieces. Again, this piece was obviously longer, but see how that spreads open? and you end up with the same look. You would do the same thing to every single pattern piece, but the one thing you really have to pay attention to is when you spread this, the amount that you spread each one needs to be equal. Otherwise, you're going to have a flare over here and a wide flare over here. So just measure and make sure the distance in between each one of these is equal on every single pattern piece. Again, if you had lengthened this, this would be a lot lower and you would have a piece of paper in here to make it longer. That's how easy this is. And again, you can make it really full, you can make it as little as you want. So let's talk about the piping. Now for the gored skirt, you can do this anywhere you want. You could have, right here we have seams in the center, the side. You could have more anywhere you want to. Just make sure that the math adds up on all of them. You can see that I've added 5 inches on each side to every single one of mine. Now on mine, I kept the hem straight, but as you could see, mine was curved on here. That's one thing I do want to point out. This was curved a little bit. You can do either one. With the straight hem, it's going to stick out a little bit more at these points. If it's curved, it's going to have a nice flow when it hangs. So do either one you want. It's your choice. It's your fashion design. Now let's look at the piping. This is just a faux suede. This is the grain line for the fabric. I've already kind of cut this apart a few times. And so you're cutting these strips on the bias. You want to cut them. Now it totally depends on the width that you want them. You could be an inch wide. Remember, if it's an inch wide and you fold it in half, by the time you have a seam allowance in there, you're not going to have much left. So it's your choice. I'm going to cut these 1.5 inches. Here we go. Quilters rulers are great because you can see through. I know that's 1.5 inches wide. Now one thing, remember I said, when you run your finger down, you can see that fabric looks a lot different than when it goes this way. That means it has a nap. So you need to remember, I want all of these piping pieces to go this way on the skirt. So when my hand rubs it, it's just rubbing the fabric down. If it's the other way, you can see how it looks a little bit messy. The other reason I like this is, number one, if it's cut on the bias, it usually won't fray. This won't fray at all, and it has a little bit of stretch. So on this skirt, one more time, let's take a peek. This is what I would call faux piping. There is nothing inside of here, just a fold of fabric into the seam. And you could have even less than that. You could have just that much showing, whatever you want, but there's nothing in that. It's just flat. So let me show you how to make piping. Take a look at these different feet for the machine. This one's a piping foot. It has 2 grooves right here. The purpose is that the cording can run right through on either side and have a perfect stitch. That's the one I'm going to use. You might also have an adjustable zipper foot, which is a great foot. This attaches to the side, and this moves back and forth, which if this was secure, your zipper foot would actually be moving back and forth. So you can get really close. If this was the piping, you could get really close to where you needed that stitch to be. That's another option, but we're going to use the other. So for the piping that I showed you on the skirt that I have, all I did was I took the fabric with right sides on the outside and folded it and made a stitch. Remember, there was nothing inside of it. But I'm going to show you the one with the cording inside, just because that's probably going to be a more popular version. So we have this. This is just a cording. You can get this in any width. Don't get too carried away, though, because if it's too thick, when you get to the bottom of the skirt, here is one of my skirts cut out. When you get to the bottom through here, if it's too thick, it's going to stick out. It's going to look more like a mermaid. If that's what you're looking for Halloween, go for a bigger piece. So take this, this is the wrong side of the fabric, fold it, and start this. Let me see, you can remember you have 2 grooves here. Start this in just a little bit. Never start right at the very end because your needle can embed in there and it won't make a nice stitch. So always give yourself a little bit of extra room so you can make sure everything's stitching perfectly. Put your needle down to make sure everything's lined up perfectly and just start stitching. Now the thing about the bias is you can pull it just a little bit. So I'm pulling it just a little bit and lining up this cording in here. You really don't need to use pins. You can if you want to, but look at how easy this is. You just kind of fold it and stitch. Again, I'm using a little bit longer stitch length, 3.0. You could even go up to 3.5 if you'd like. And I'm just going to finish this and then show you how to pin it into the skirt. Again, there's my arrow. I know that that's going to be at the bottom of my skirt. And that's about good. I think you're getting the idea. And here you have it. Now what I usually like to do is take this, after I usually sew a few pieces of this. Just keep sewing rows and rows and rows. Then I go back to the cutting mat and make sure that if, this is what you need to really keep in mind, so pay attention here. This is my skirt. This is where it's going to go inside your seam, okay? But how wide is your seam allowance? Is your seam allowance only a 1/2 inch wide? Well, then you'd be stitching about right here, and you're gonna still see all of this line here. So you need to keep in mind, what is your seam allowance? Whatever your seam allowance is should measure from inside that stitch line, which I've used a white thread so you can see it, or a cream thread, measure from here to here on your piping for however wide of a seam allowance you want, and trim that. Okay, I'm just gonna stitch this just to show you to get started, but I think you have the idea. So all you do is put this into the seam, and why don't I stitch this just a little bit to give you an idea, but you're gonna basically, again, I'm putting this under my foot. This is the cool part of that foot. There's 2 grooves. I don't have to change anything, and just start stitching. Going around the curves is absolutely no problem. Again, I'm not even using pins, I'm just stitching. Going around. And let's just get to this one last part so you can see. See, that's kind of a sharp curve. Just kind of maneuver. Pretty easy, huh? So I would do this to one side of every single pattern piece. Let me just stop there just to explain this. And I think you're getting the idea. This is so easy. This will be my seam. See how nice that's going to look? So I would take every single pattern piece, and I usually start on the right side or the left side and add piping to every single right side. Be careful because you want to make sure you don't add piping to this seam and this seam. But once it's all added, then I just take match up my pattern pieces because you've marked them really well, and open that up and stitch all of your seams together, and you're finished. And then all I did for the waistband is I used a piece of bias strip and wrapped it around for the waistband. That's how easy it is to transfer a regular skirt into a gored skirt.